Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share scary college and university's horror stories. First story, how to survive college. My university has this one strange rule. I never realized just how small my world was. I've never been further than an hour's drive from home, and now I'm in another state surrounded by more people than I've ever seen in my life. I don't even know where to start. Leaving home was pretty rough on its own, to say nothing of the grief my family put me through. I told them that I was going to college a couple weeks in advance of the move-in date. I sort of had to. My boyfriend's disappearance had thrown my mother into a frenzy. I didn't tell anyone what I saw in the woods. I told Tyler about the shuriken, but not about Krampus. He thinks it'll be fine in the end. The campground isn't open during the Christmas season, after all, because no one wants to camp in the snow. He's only got his staff to worry about, and he doesn't think the shuriken will actually be drowning anyone. They didn't carry through with their threat, after all. They might have free run of the campground now, but that puts them under the jurisdiction of the lady, and Kate had enough bad run-ins with the shuriken while she was human that he doesn't think she'll let them get away with much. He doesn't think anything that the lake could attract could get away with much. There's an ancient in charge of the campground now, after all. I hope he's right. Lakes are dangerous, and Kate probably isn't going to be happy to have to deal with that. She really can't catch a break. Can she, either as a human or as an ancient? But that's not my problem. No, my problem was my family being shitty to me. I blurted it out one evening when Mom was in a frenzy about what I was going to do about my future if my ex-boyfriend didn't come back. So I was like, hey, I have a plan. I'm going to college. You don't need to keep freaking out about me. Oof, big mistake. My mom was upset, but she was worried, and that's not quite the same as being mean. It still sucked to deal with. I was already nervous enough about uprooting my whole life and having to reassure my mom on top of it, instead of the other way around, was kind of a lot. I suppose she's afraid I'll go away and not come back like Dad did, and that's traumatizing, but I lost my dad. It's not like I don't have my own issues about that. It's not like I'm not scared to leave. So yeah, we were both upset and stressed, and naturally that led to some fights. I feel I could have handled it if that was all, though. But then my older sister decided to get involved. She still comes around the house a bit, usually when she's bored at home by herself while her husband is at work. She was convinced that my boyfriend's sudden disappearance was my fault, like I'd driven him off or something by being too clingy or not clingy enough. I wasn't helping at Mom's junk store because I wasn't getting along with her and the campground was closed for the season. So that meant I was home a lot, watching over the younger siblings during winter break. And unfortunately, that meant I was around my older sister far more than I'd like. It was just this constant shitty nagging at me. Where did I think he went? What was the last thing I said to him? Was I trying to pressure him into marriage? Boys don't like to be pressured. And then I said he's not a boy, he's a man. We're both 18, and talking back was clearly the wrong thing to do. Honestly, I think she's unhappy in her own marriage and is either projecting or is trying to force me into the same miserable choices she made, so she is company. Joke's on her, my ex-boyfriend is dead. My younger siblings tend to parrot whatever she does as well. So it's been weeks of nothing but pick on Ashley. And when I finally shut down and stopped responding, it turned into, well, now Ashley is too good for us because she's leaving. I think I understand why Kate didn't get along with her extended family. This town fucking sucks sometimes. Anyway, by the time move-in weekend rolled around, it had gotten so bad that I didn't even have a ride to school. I'd figured out how to apply to school on my own, so I could figure out how to get there myself as well, my mother's shitty excuse, and possibly a last-ditch attempt to keep me safe at home. And my older sister told me that I didn't deserve her help because I wasn't properly grateful for the things I had here, which, for the record, was a boyfriend that hit me. Obviously, I don't have a car. I called Tyler in tears, and his wife, who is an absolute saint, volunteered to take me. And then she shows up to pick me up, and when I go to put my bags in the trunk, I find there's a care package assembled by the campground staff. Like there was food, shower sandals, which I didn't even know was a thing you needed, a bathrobe, a cute throw pillow that someone made, an electric kettle, microwave popcorn, and even a bottle of moonshine. Yes, I am underage, and yes, that is 100% not allowed in the dorms. Sometimes this town fucking sucks, and sometimes it's the best place full of the best people. Move-in was pretty crazy. Everyone was coming back from winter break, and while it wasn't as bad as fall semester move-in, according to Tyler's wife, it was still a lot of cars and a lot of people. Tyler's wife helped with the whole thing. I sort of just followed her lead the whole time. She checked in at the dorm front desk for me and got my dorm assignment and helped me bring my stuff upstairs. My roommate had moved in during the fall semester, and her things were already neatly distributed in the room. There were 2 loft beds, and she had a futon, a mini fridge, and a microwave position underneath them. Tyler's wife helped me put my things away and pretended not to see me stashing the moonshine in my underwear drawer. Then she went with me to meet with my advisor and didn't bother to correct anyone when they called her my mom. See? She's a saint. I don't know what I would have done without her. Been stuck in that crummy town, sitting in the deep woods sobbing on Beau's shoulder, I suppose. I haven't picked a major yet. I honestly have no idea what I want to do. My first semester is crammed, full of general electives instead. I did abysmally on my math placement exam, and I've got at least 2 semesters worth of catch-up before I'm on par with the students coming from fancy high schools with AP classes. Then Tyler's wife insisted we take a self-guided tour of campus so that I'd know where my classes were. The student orientation for the spring semester newcomers was the next day, but Tyler's wife doubted it'd cover much more than where a couple key buildings were. I was completely overwhelmed by that point, so I thought that yes, a walk around campus would be nice. It's nothing like home. I noticed that on the drive over. The soft hills and forests gave way to flat plains covered with fields of corn and soybeans. I've never seen so much sky at once in my life. I felt incredibly small, like the sky was a vast and ancient god staring down at the little ants scurrying far below. At least the campus had buildings and trees to break the oppressive monotony, though they did nothing to relieve the wind. If anything, they condensed it so that it came roaring between the buildings like an oncoming train. It was bitterly cold, and it wasn't long before I couldn't feel my nose. I forgot about the cold when we reached the northern part of campus. Instead of a lovely green stretch with trees and landscaping or more buildings, there was a cemetery. An actual cemetery with headstones and faded fake flowers and an iron fence encasing it. "This is different," Tyler's wife finally said. "I guess the university just built up around it over time." "I'm not sure I want to go here anymore," I said. "Not every place is like the campground. My university was perfectly normal. No one died while I was there." "That you knew of," I replied pointedly. She didn't have a response to that. "Still," she said cheerfully, "just because there's a graveyard here doesn't mean there's anything unnatural going on. This might not be on old land." The wind picked up, rattling the branches and shaking the artificial flowers decorating the headstones. "Sure," I said, unconvinced. "How about I just stay away from this part of campus after dark?" "Yeah, that'd probably be smart." "Excuse me," a voice said from behind us. "Are you new here?" We both turned. A short young man stood behind us, smirking with obvious glee at our consternation at finding a cemetery in the middle of campus. "Yeah," I said. "This is my move-in day. So you haven't had orientation yet. Well, they'll tell you about it tomorrow. It's not that exciting, though. The campus just sort of swallowed this area up, and they didn't want to move all the bodies somewhere else. Sometimes they'll be holding a burial while you're walking to class. That's always awkward. So it's actively being used still?" Tyler's wife asked. It was, the student explained. It wasn't anywhere near full, and the campus only bordered 3 sides of the cemetery anyway, and so it'd likely be in use for years to come as they could always expand. The student medical center was on one end and the math department on the other, so there were a lot of jokes about that, but otherwise it wasn't that big of a deal. Now the rain, on the other hand. "Pardon?" I asked in that polite way that still left no room for doubt that I would have an explanation. The student glanced thoughtfully at the sky. It had been overcast all day, but I hadn't bothered to check the forecast to see if it was going to storm or not. They'll tell you about it at orientation, he said reluctantly. But I suppose I should go ahead and spoil some of the fun, just in case it rains tonight. It's 20 degrees out, Tyler's wife said. Yeah, we're going to get a warm snap. It'll jump to above freezing in a few hours. It's just something that happens around here. Which is weird, right? Like, I think that's weird. But I don't know. Maybe it is normal for this area. I'm going to an out-of-state college after all. I don't really know what things are like around here. There's only one thing you need to know about this university, he continued. No one goes outside when it rains. For any reason whatsoever. That can't be true, I said flatly. How do you attend classes if you don't go outside when it's raining? Professors will cancel class. Well, most of them will. Ask your dorm floor for an invite to the university Discord. We'll get you a list of the ones that don't. And what happens to those that do go out in the rain? Oh, you'll hear the stories. There's lots of them. He winked at me and then walked away. Tyler's wife and I watched him go in dismay. Or at least, I was dismayed. Tyler's wife continued to try and find the silver lining. She was really working to make my first day on campus special. Schools always have these silly legends, she said cheerfully. My school believed that if you didn't kiss the toe of the founder's statue on the way to your final exams, you'd fail. Gross. And yet the statue's toe was still shiny and polished. I wish that was it. I really do. I wish I'd gone back to my dorm room and met my roommate and nothing else happened. My roommate. At least I'm used to sharing a small space with other people. I grew up in a big family, after all. Otherwise, I'm not sure how I'd do this whole sharing a small space with a total stranger thing. Not that there's anything wrong with Cassie. She's all right. Comes from some white picket fence, kind of suburb with good schools and parents that are helping pay for her tuition. I mean, she's not rich, if that's what you're thinking, middle class, or at least what the middle class is supposed to be. This is not a prestigious private school, after all. It's an obscure state college, and she's in-state, unlike me. It's a practical choice. I think we're both a lot alike in that regard. Maybe we come from wildly different backgrounds, but we both went with the sensible choices. I think we'll get along. She'd been here since the start of the fall semester. Her former roommate dropped out or something. Cassie wasn't sure, since she'd never told her the reason. Just left during finals week, and when she got back from her classes, her roommate's side of the room was cleared out, and she hadn't heard from her since. They weren't really friends, Cassie said, so she wasn't particularly bothered by it. It happened. Yes, I texted Tyler's wife and asked her if it really was something that happened at college, and she texted me back that yes, it was, and to stop assuming the rest of the world was like the campground. But in my defense, the rest of the world is like the campground. Maybe, if you're unlucky, or live on old land. Cassie got me hooked up with the campus Discord invite. There's channels for each dorm and dorm floor, which is kind of cool. I don't know if it's normal for university students to be this organized, and Discord wasn't around when Tyler's wife went to school, so she can't really tell me. I'm pretty glad they are, though, because when I joined, I was greeted with a pinned announcement in the general channel. Cassie had already gone to bed. I was too excited to sleep yet, so I was still up even though it was well past midnight. The computer screen was the only light in our dorm room as I stared at the message. It's supposed to rain tonight, it said. No one go outside. And as I finished reading it, the clouds broke and the rain slammed into the window of our dorm. It sounded like the impact of a fist, and I jumped in my chair. In her loft bed, Cassie woke with a start. She stared at the window, her back to me, her hair a wispy mass floating across her shoulders. Ashley, she whispered. Yeah. Don't go outside, okay? She lay back down and pulled the covers up over her head. Her voice was muffled by the blanket. I stared out the window. Campus is a lot brighter than I'm used to. There aren't many streetlights where I'm from. Just a couple on Main Street and some on the campground. They're everywhere on the university, though. Stately arches, aesthetically pleasing, lighting each and every walkway. Their warm glow made the rain shimmer like it was cut from glass. The wind transformed the rain into sheets, and it was like a glittering mirage, distorting the world outside my window. I didn't like it. It made me uneasy. Then I saw something approaching. A human figure running. I squinted, trying to make it out in the hazy mix of light and darkness. A woman. She was sprinting for the side entrance to the dormitory, running with panicked abandon. She wasn't trying to shield herself from the rain. She wasn't tucked over to protect her purse or her phone somewhere on her body. She looked desperate. "Cassie," I hissed. "Someone is out there. Go to bed, Ashley." I glanced over at my roommate's loft. She'd pulled her blankets up over her head. Then I looked back outside. The woman was at the door, frantically swiping her key card. It took her 2 tries before the panel turned green and she was able to yank the door open. I watched until it fell shut behind her and she was out of sight, safely inside the building. And something hit the door behind her hard enough that it shook in its frame. I saw the impact as a splatter of raindrops, like someone had thrown a water balloon and it exploded on impact. I stared intently at the rain and the darkness. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wanted to say I was just being silly, but I knew better than to dismiss what I saw. So I stared, searching for whatever had hit the door, and then it hit the window of my dorm room. A single blow with a crack like a rock hitting the glass. I stumbled backwards with a sharp gasp of surprise, my chest seizing up in sudden panic. Nothing else happened. Like whatever was out there saw me looking for it, and decided to warn me off. "Cassie," I gasped, my voice a frightened croak. "What was that?" But Cassie stubbornly refused to answer this time. I nervously glanced out the window one more time, but nothing else happened. Just the rain hitting the pavement in sheets with each gust of the wind. Finally, reluctantly, I gathered up my bathroom caddy to go brush my teeth. It really was getting late, and I needed to sleep at some point. Besides, my hands were shaking, and I needed some sort of routine to calm my nerves, or I'd never get to sleep. I heard her, the woman fleeing the rain, on my way to the bathroom. She's someone on my floor. I heard her sobbing inside her dorm room. Our rooms are decently insulated, but I think she was right up against the door. I paused to listen in. I felt a little bit guilty, but I needed to know. It's okay, another voice was saying. Her roommate. "You're back." Nothing happened. "It happened so fast," she gasped. "The sky just opened up." I know. And my boyfriend, he says someone on his floor heard the scratching. It's only our first day back dash. Their voices dwindled as they moved further into the dorm room. I hurried on before anyone caught me eavesdropping. "Cassie," I asked once I was back in the room. She grunted to indicate she was still awake. "What happens if I go outside?" "Nothing," she said. "Nothing at all." I wish I could believe her. But considering how I grew up and listening to the rain slam against the window like it was trying to find a way in, I can't just ignore what I saw, especially since I saw one last thing after I had climbed into my loft. I looked out the window one more time, and from that angle, I could see something in the door that I hadn't been able to see before. Something that wasn't there when I'd used that door earlier in the day. A crack across the entire length of the glass pane. Second story, there are abandoned tunnels under my university. I'm an American University student, not to be confused with an American University student and prospective engineer. My school is split into 3 main campuses, one of which is exclusively for freshmen. Underneath our manicured lawns and Gothic architecture lies an elaborate network of tunnels that have been closed for years. I'm not sure what the tunnels were for, or when they were used, but all entrances are now locked and barricaded. Of course, those in the know could point you towards a low-key access point on the freshman campus. Across from my old dormitory is a 1920s-era brick building that we use for seminars and discussion classes. In the back, next to the dumpster, you can find a small window situated about a foot from the ground. The original sealant around the frame is long gone, so the whole thing slides right out of the wall when pulled hard enough. If you can fit through the opening, you're in. Exploring the tunnels was a popular late-night adventure for students. Groups of freshmen eager to prove themselves would sneak through the window while security guards changed shifts. Climbing the domed roof of our auditorium was another such graduation requirement. It was almost too easy to get away with. I visited the tunnels a few times myself, usually after returning from the off-campus bar or club. Here are a couple representative pictures from my phone. The concrete walls and exposed piping are a sharp contrast to the well-curated campus above. My most memorable subterranean incident involved an errant fire extinguisher triggering a dorm clearing 4 a.m. alarm. But there's nothing supernatural about being obnoxious. The tunnels are surprisingly difficult to navigate. They seem to loop around and branch in unintuitive ways, a chaotic mix of alternate routes and dead ends. Maybe it's just my poor sense of direction, but I don't remember ever coming across the same passage twice. One fall evening, a group of guys from my freshman hall went to hang in the tunnels as per usual. It was a quiet Friday. Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday are the main going-out nights, and they'd rolled up some joints to smoke down there. After entering through the window and ambling around, my friends came across a fork decorated with heavy graffiti. While vandalism in the tunnels isn't unusual, this artwork was aggressive. Huge black and red skulls covered the walls, captioned with messages to turn back now. From how they described the scene, it was a definite departure from the expletives and cartoon genitalia with which I was familiar. The group was intrigued and buzzed, enough to enter the corridor in spite of the bad vibes. It was dimly lit and narrow, but not uncomfortable if you walked single file. There was no graffiti past the entrance. One of my friends, who we'll call Rick, edged past the others to pick up a yellowed 1996 copy of our school's paper. As Rick sat down to read it over, another friend snapped his photo. Fast forward an hour or two, and we're all back together in the dorm. While browsing through pictures, we come across the shot of Rick checking out the newspaper. The photographer clearly hadn't looked at it yet, because none of us could make sense of what we saw. About 30 feet down the tunnel, a figure in a white undershirt is purposefully striding towards a sitting Rick. It looks to be a man of medium build whose face is hidden in shadow. According to the witnesses, this dude was simply not there. They hadn't seen another soul that night. What do you think, Reddit? The figure's outfit didn't match any of my friends, who were all standing behind Rick anyway. Someone hypothesized that it could have been a homeless man emerging from a side corridor, but that doesn't explain how 5 guys completely failed to notice him. As we huddled around the phone, the genuine disbelief written on my friends' faces confirmed the picture's authenticity. We never came up with a satisfactory explanation, and I haven't been back to the tunnels in a long time. Maybe you can spot something that we missed. Third story. The true story of the psycho from sophomore year. Everyone has a story of someone in their past whom they expect to see on the nightly news. That steroid-fused father who got thrown out of his kid's soccer game. The moronic prankster who sent out an anonymous bomb threat just to cut class. That ex who could never quite give up. For me, it's exponential. Every time I hear a tragedy on the news, whether it be a shooting or a kidnapping or some other horror, a small voice in the back of my head creeps up from a whisper to a crescendo. What if that guy finally did what he said he would, and I never told anyone? I can't live with that. So now, I'm telling you, there aren't any ghouls, ghosts, or goblins in this story. No creatures hiding in your peripherals or illusions of grandeur. I understand the rule on no sleep is that everything is true. I'm here to enact the simplest interpretation of that rule, without any winks or nudges. This is the story of the truest horror I've experienced my entire life, one that I've kept to myself for far too long. This is the story of the psychopath who ruined my sophomore year of college. I went to a state school in the heart of New Jersey. My life wasn't all that different from your average college experience, I suppose. After a year of living in on campus, my friends and I decided to finally break the shackles of dorm life and rent a house off campus. The area and the house itself were sketchy at best. In the first month, we were forced to move out for a couple of days because of an electrical fire in the upstairs apartment. It was fairly common for someone to be mugged late at night, and if you went down a few blocks, shootings were not unheard of either. I rented the house with 5 other guys, and a group of 6 girls lived next door. We had known them from freshman year, and managed to rent two buildings right next door to one another. The first couple weeks were amazing: parties, drinking, debauchery. Sleep was for the day, and class was for the dumb. One girl in particular, Alyssa, had always been like a little sister to me. She had dated my friend for a few months, and we had become good friends in the process. Alyssa was the type of girl that had to try every obscure activity once. What better way to enjoy the college experience than to try everything? StarCraft Club? Check. Classics Club dress-up night? Check. Getting stoned and passing out on the roof? Check. It was her idea to move somewhere nearby, and I was naturally all for it. One day, after a few weeks of living off campus, she came to me with a flyer for an on-campus event. Learn to Give the Perfect Massage, I believe it was called. To be honest, I wasn't one to sacrifice my time for these events. They usually involved forced social interactions that almost always led to nothing but 20 kids desperately eyeing the clock. However, I hadn't been out all that much, and I had been pigeonholing myself to my own group of friends for quite some time. It was time to meet some new people, so I decided to give a shot. Alyssa and I got to the class 5 minutes late, and the lecture had begun as we grabbed our seats. Most people in the class were typical guys, anxious for the excuse to obviously grope girls. A few were shy, awkward freshmen who were just trying to meet new friends. One guy, however, stood out to me. He stood at the back of the room, away from all the mini groups and circles that had formed. He sat on the floor with his legs spread and pulled up to his chest, and he looked straight at the floor with a surly look painted on his stoic face. For a reason that I can't really explain, this guy struck me as different. I don't know why, to be honest. He wasn't any taller than average. No shorter, no thinner, no fatter. His hair wasn't too long or too short. He wore a pair of blue jeans and a plain white shirt. But the way he avoided eye contact with anyone in the room for the entirety of the lecture still gives me chills to this day. After a brief introduction and an hour or so of instruction and lecture, we were randomly paired to begin trying the exercises on one another. I was paired with a chatty girl with long black hair who seemed nice enough. Alyssa, on the other hand, was not so lucky. Now, this part of the story I only know secondhand. I was on the other side of the room and, to be honest, far more interested in my partner than what was going on with Alyssa. When it was time to go, I walked over to Alyssa and her partner and said hello. She smiled nervously at me, pretending to be incredibly involved with putting things in her backpack, while her partner glared at me for about 10 seconds. I opened my mouth to introduce myself, and he turned and walked away. What was that about? I had asked her, thoroughly baffled. I have no idea, she responded. He didn't say a word the entire time. I tried to talk to him, asked him about school, not a word. He just said his name was TJ. Can we just go? Thinking little of it, we grabbed in bags and headed home. Because it was a Friday night, Alyssa and her roommates came over to drink and hang out. To be candid, I don't remember much of that night. So let's move on to the next morning. Alyssa woke up and had 5 emails, all from different addresses, but with a similar theme. She sent me them at one point, but I lost them, so I'll have to paraphrase. Email 1: hello, this is TJ from class. It was really nice to meet you. Email 2: do you know of any parties tonight? I'd love to bring you to one. My number is redacted. Email 3: do you use this email often? Email 4: please write back with your number. Email 5: I added you on Facebook. My name there is Joe Simpson. First off, Alyssa never gave him her email. He probably found it on a school mailing list or something along those lines. Regardless, Alyssa responded with a kind yet firm email. She lied and said her boyfriend, one of my roommates, was very protective and didn't want her giving her number out to guys. After that, he didn't respond through email. Second, his name wasn't Joe Simpson. I have no idea why he liked alternate names, but it wasn't the first he tried to add her with. Henry Ford, John Jones. There were at least 20 in the first week. Then it started to get creepier. He would create names that meant something to her. Jim Carrey, her favorite actor, was one. When that didn't work, he tried her favorite author, musician, athlete. We never knew how he learned so much about her. The messages started to get more descriptive as well. He would say things like, "Your boyfriend is a scumbag. He's cheating on you. And if I can make him leave you, will you see me?" Ignoring him only made it worse. The messages turned into phone calls after he, somehow, got her phone number. He would call in the middle of the night. 1 a.m., 2, 3. It didn't matter. Sometimes he wouldn't say a thing at all. He'd just sit in silence as Alyssa yelled into the phone, begging for him to leave her alone. Once he got Alyssa's phone number, he got her boyfriend's. He would call and send text messages telling him he was worthless, that she didn't care about him, that he had hooked up with her. When it got to the point that they were concerned for their safety, they contacted the school. Keep in mind, this was before the school shoots in the United States were a major problem. Back then, schools were not nearly as concerned about what they viewed as an argument among college students. Since he had never physically threatened either Alyssa or her boyfriend, there was nothing they could do but bring him in for a talk. That didn't help. 3 days later, Alyssa got a text message from TJ. It was just a couple words, but it was enough. It was her address. Funny how 2 words on 4x4 screen can make you fear for your safety and the safety of those around you. She didn't respond. She packed up a bunch of her stuff, called her boyfriend, and asked if she could stay at our place for a little bit. She didn't have any other guy friend in the area, and she didn't have the money for a hotel. Naturally, we told her, of course. What did one guy have against 6 overconfident 19-year-olds? I was out late that night. My roommate stayed at home, while I went out to a nearby bar and had a drink, or 6, with some friend from class. I remember stumbling back down the empty college streets around 2 in the morning. It had just started to snow, and I was underdressed. A thin button-down clung to my skin. I stripped it off as I rounded the corner to my house. I was drunkenly trying to shake the snow off of it when I looked up and saw TJ standing on my front porch. He turned to face me, and I'll never forget the look of determination painted on his face. In one hand, he held the collapsible baton. In the other, the key to our apartment. 4th story. My college girlfriend went missing in 2005. She just showed up at my door, and she hasn't aged. "Melissa," I gasped. Abject horror must have been painted on my nonplussed face. The girl was no figurative ghost from my past. I could see her tangible form before me, as plainly as the doorstep on which she stood. I was 18 years old when she went missing. We were university freshers, and we'd been dating since college, or the 12th grade in the States. Boyfriends are often suspects in cases of missing women, so I was unfazed by the incessant police questioning. However, much to many people's disbelief, Melissa's disappearance was a mystery to me. When I first entered her dorm room, after 24 hours without contact, everything was untouched. No sign of forced entry. On Melissa's desk, there was a sturdy stack of biology books, a Nokia brick phone, which was ordinarily welded to her hand, and, perhaps most ominously, a lifeless plate of day-old lasagna. 18 years later, at the age of 36, that vivid, vibrant memory had not waned in my mind. The most horrifying thing about Melissa's sudden reappearance, 3 hours ago, was that she hadn't aged. Like a snapshot of the past, she was still wearing the purple plaid cardigan and denim jeans from the last day on which I'd seen her. "Hi, Andy," Melissa said. The 18-year-old girl on my porch did not allow me more than a few seconds to gather my thoughts. That was probably for the best, as I think my mind might have shattered if I tried to piece together the impossibility before me. "You're probably wondering where I've been for so many years," she sheepishly said. "I'm wondering a lot of things right now." I breathlessly spluttered. "Let me show you," she eerily whispered. Before I had a chance to refuse, my ageless ex-girlfriend seized my hand, and the world swirled into a kaleidoscope of colors. Bright, beautiful hues of red, yellow, blue, and green encompassed me. They quickly morphed into grim, ghastly shades of black. I shrieked in terror at the dreadful vision that followed. In the darkness, I caught frightful flashes of the day on which Melissa disappeared. A faceless silhouette apprehended her in a forest, and Melissa kept crying that she had no idea how she'd ended up there. The shadowy presence ignored her pleas for help, instead dragging her to its darkened cave and slowly stretching her body over itself like a snuggly winter coat. Melissa screamed, inexplicably still alive, as the silhouette clothed itself in her body. When the screaming ceased, the thing that pretended to be my girlfriend calmly strolled out of the cave. Our real surroundings returned, and I found myself facing the abomination on my porch. Melissa's face started to melt, as if she were a wax candle, the wick being her lopsided head. Her grin was sickening. It wasn't the warm, endearing smile of the girl I used to know. It was the crooked, ill-meaning expression of something feigning humanity. "I love you so much, Andy," Melissa said. "It's been so painful without you. I didn't realize I was what my body needed. That's the missing ingredient. I can't sustain myself without you." It stretched a gauntly hand towards me, stepping towards my front door as I took a step backwards. I couldn't utter a word. I could scarcely move, but I eventually summoned the courage to hightail it through my house and out of the back door. I took the first bus I hailed, and I've been on the road for 3 hours. I don't know where I'm going, and I don't care. I decided to post what happened on here in the hope that somebody could tell me what had just knocked on my door. It definitely wasn't Melissa, and I don't think it'll stop until it finds me again. Fifth story: the real horror of haunted houses. Last October, a group of my friends and I decided we wanted to go to a haunted house. Being that we were in college, we wanted to find the scariest one possible in our area. We Googled haunted houses all over the state and found one about an hour and a half away from our university with the best reviews. I can't specifically say where in the state it is, as it is an ongoing investigation, and I've signed a contract with the establishment which doesn't allow me to disclose the name of the haunted house or the location. This is to ensure that no one becomes unnecessarily alarmed. But I'm telling my story because you absolutely should alarmed. I was impressed with the building upon arriving. It was 4 stories high. Previously, it was some sort of factory that was later abandoned, then bought and turned into a haunted house. Well, more like a haunted building, but whatever. We waited in line for over 2 hours. When we got to the front of the line, we were handed contracts, which was a little weird to me, but everyone was signing them, so I was fine with it. I didn't really read fully through it, but basically it stated that you were not allowed to touch the employees within the haunted house, unless they touched you first, which they were not allowed to do. It also stated that if you were able to make it all the way to the end of the 4th floor, you'd get your money back and a free t-shirt saying, "I survived ___ haunted house." One of my friends was curious and asked a worker prior to us entering the 1st floor how many people had made it all the way through. He told us only 17 had in the past month and a half that they were open. The contract also stated that you were to remove anything from you person that would be damaged, if wet prior to entering, and that they would not be held responsible for anything that got ruined due to water damage. They had a neat organization system of bins where each group could put their cell phones and such and get them back at the end of the haunted house. We were all pretty confused by this, but went along with it and put our cell phones into the bin. They sent people into the haunted house in small groups. My group of friends and I consisted of 6 people, so they let us all go in at once together. Now, to be honest, I get fairly jumping when things come popping out at me, but other than that, nothing typically scares me too much. But this house was something else. It wasn't your typical haunted house with simple, spooky decorations and people dressed as zombies who jumped out at you. It was messed. When we entered the first door, we were immediately in a small room, which barely could fit us all without us touching the walls and feeling like a can of sardines. We watched the employee shut the door behind us, and were left standing in the pitch black, trying to see something, anything. We didn't see or couldn't feel another door or any other way to get out. It felt like the only way out was the way we came in. Just as we were beginning to feeling a little uneasy and claustrophobic, the wall adjacent to the door we came in completely dropped. I mean, it completely just dropped into a slit into the floor. It was pretty impressive mechanics. It opened up to a room with red painted walls. Hesitantly, we walked in. The three men walked in first. I should mention we went with 3 couples, 3 guys, and 3 girls. Anyways, the room was much larger than the last, and also appeared to be totally empty, but with a door clearly visible at the back right corner farthest away from us. We all kept our eyes focused on the door as we walked towards it, half expecting someone to open it and come running at us. We had walked about halfway across the room when we started to notice the wall to our right was closing in, and a red gooey liquid began to come through holes in the wall on our left. It wasn't particularly frightening, but in fear of the wall closing in on us enough to squash us, we hurried through the next door. The door opened up to an extremely long, almost totally dark hallway. It was quiet until loud, sinister laughing began playing on some sort of unseeable speaker system. At the same time, gas began to slither up from vents in the floor. It smelled foul, like rotten meat. It made me almost instantly feel sick. We quickly began running down the hallway away from the smoke into the next room. As we were running, we heard footsteps behind us. Turning around, I expected to see people in costumes chasing after us, trying to get us or something. But no, instead I saw 5 little kids, probably around 8 or 9 years old. They were covered in fake blood and looked extremely menacing. Just then one little boy yelled, "Mommy told us not to play mean with animals anymore, but Mommy is gone now, and you'll be gone next." I realized that doesn't sound really scary or anything, and it wasn't, to be honest, it was just unsettling. After we reached the end of the hallway, there was an exit sign and a door. We had been told there would be clear exits at the end of every floor for people who wanted to leave. We laughed at the thought of leaving. It wasn't even scary, we thought. And up the stairs to the next floor we went. We came upon 2 doors at the top of the stairs. Both had signs on them saying 3 at a time, if you dare. So we split up into groups of 3. I went with my 2 friends through the door on the right. We went through 2 sets of doors to get to the room, the second door being airtight, into a small room which fit us all snugly. It was dark, but we could tell the walls appeared to be made of some sort of thick plexiglass. We stood there for a moment, wondering what was going to happen next. A light then came on to our right. We turned to see a man standing outside of our safe little fishbowl. He was in ragged clothes, just standing there with his head down holding a knife. Then that side went dark, and the opposite side of us, outside of our little space, lit up. We all turned the other way to see. There was a woman dressed similarly in a rugged fashion as the man was, also holding a knife looking down. The light illuminating her then went off. We all turned to the last remaining side that had yet to be lit up besides the door behind us that we came in. When it lit up, we looked expecting to see another person standing there, but there wasn't. It was a German Shepherd. All of a sudden it ran at us and began barking, scratching loudly against the plexiglass. Something about its nature just screamed, "I have rabies and want to bite your throat out just for fun." It made us cringe away as much as we could in the confined space. Then the light went out and the dog stopped barking. I felt my shoes getting wet suddenly. It wasn't completely dark, so when we looked down we were able to see the water beginning to fill up at our ankles now. Higher and higher it rose until it was waist high. We looked up and saw the container we were in had a top to it, so there was no getting out that way. I began to panic a little. I knew plenty of people had gone through here, so it wasn't like they were actually going to let us drown, but the 2 guys I were with are much taller than me. I'm a 5 feet 6 inches female, which was nothing compared to the 2 of them who were both over 6 feet. My mind was racing. What if the water went over my head, and the people running this thing didn't account for how short I was? Interrupting my thoughts, I noticed the women on the other side of the plexiglass, holding the knife right against the glass. I screamed a little. We all then noticed the man and women were both right on the other side of the plexiglass, banging on it with their knives, yelling at us. The dog also came back and started barking intensely. It was all pretty overwhelming and went on for what felt like an hour, as the water was rising right up to my neck. The guys I were with grabbed my arms and lifted me up in fear of the water coming up to my mouth and nose soon. But then the man and women walked away, The man called after the dog, and it listened obediently and went along with them out of our sight. Once they were gone, the 3 walls of plexiglass quickly fell from our sides, letting water pour out all over the floor. I wanted the hell out of there, so I immediately just started running in the direction the dog had been. I don't know why, but I guess my instincts felt like that was the best option. As I was running, I heard a chainsaw go off behind me, followed by my friend's screams, but I just kept running without glancing back, looking for a way out. I finally came to a door and yelled for my friends to come along, but they were gone. When I turned around and looked at the now fallen fish-like tank about 25 feet away from me, they were nowhere to be seen. I looked closer, trying to see as much as I could in the dim lighting. There appeared to be some sort of fake blood mixed in with the water that had spilled out of the tank that I didn't notice before, but I didn't think much of it. I figured my friends had gotten chased off by some employee into another room, and I would meet up with them later. So I opened the door and decided I was going to go find the next exit on this floor and get out. I had enough. If I almost drowned on the 2nd floor, I wasn't about to see what was next for me on the 3rd or 4th. I came into yet another hallway. It was dark and narrow. I couldn't exactly see how far it went, but it seemed long and extremely cold, which was only amplified by my soaking wet clothing. I took a few steps forward, and a wall came up from the floor behind me, blocking me from trying to leave through the door I had just came in. I continued to walk forward until I began to see someone in front of me. It was a man, standing there about 20 feet away, holding what looked like a chainsaw. I wasn't that surprised, honestly. I had been in haunted houses before where some guy with a fake chainsaw chased you until you got to the next room. So I began to walk towards him. I figured he was probably the one who chased my friends off and was now trying to get me back on track with them and go into the next room I was supposed to. But I wanted out, so I walked toward him. The closer I got, I was able to make out a door frame behind him. He was wearing what I thought was an unusual outfit for someone who worked at a haunted house. He had on dress shoes, black slacks with a black dress top, and a black tie. In any other situation, I would have thought he looked quiet sharp, honestly. The only thing making him look unusual besides the chainsaw he was holding was a thin black sort of mask that covered just his eyes and nose, with slits in it so he could see. I was about 10 feet away when I decided that he was just a regular guy working at a haunted house. So if I told him I wanted to leave, I'm sure he would just be cool, step aside, and point me to the exit. Having decided to say something, I stopped walking and looked at him. "Hey, mister, listen, I know you're just doing your job, but I honestly just want out of here. So if you could please just step aside and point me toward the exit, I would really appreciate it." He immediately broke from his stone-cold, expressionless face and smiled, laughing hysterically. I paused. It wasn't a, "oh, look at this little scared bitch," giggly type of laugh. It was truly beyond creepy. I really don't know how else to explain it. He then started to turn on the chainsaw, which is when I looked closer and made a horrible realization. It was real. Not the fake haunted house toy shit. It is a real chainsaw. I started to back away as he came closer. "Hey, seriously, man, just let me out. This isn't funny," I said in what I thought was an angry tone, but was more than likely extremely scared sounding. He just kept walking closer and closer towards me until I was backed up against the wall. I was cornered. "Seriously, turn the chainsaw off and just let me through, asshole." He just kept smiling and laughing until he was about a foot away from me. Glancing at the chainsaw, I noticed it was covered in blood, and so were both his hands. I didn't know what to do. I just panicked and stood there frozen, meeting his intimidating gaze. He held the chainsaw still running at his side with one hand and reached the other hand out to me, stroking the side of my face and brushing my hair back. I pushed his hand away. "What man, employees aren't allowed to touch us. Cut this shit out and move." I was somewhere in between pissed off and terrified. He laughed and titled his head a little. "That's the thing, sweetheart," he said with a sickeningly low grovel voice. "I don't work here." His words ran through me like a lightning bolt, and my instincts took over before I really even processed the words. I darted underneath his arm, which was still outstretched, touching my hair. As I pulled away, he grabbed a small chunk of my hair, but I just pushed forward harder as I felt my hair being pulled out until I slipped away. Running towards the door, I could hear him close behind me, chainsaw still in hand. Then I felt it like Satan's trident brushing against my back. I screamed. The chainsaw had grazed my back and cut my shirt open. I could feel the blood already dripping down my backside, but I was full of adrenaline and only feet away from the door, so I kept going. I reached and opened the door, whipping myself through and slamming it hard behind me. I kept running through the next room and didn't look back. I fully expected him to come barging through the door behind me, but he never did. That didn't stop me from running, though. I couldn't even tell you what was in the next hell room I ran, though. I just kept going until I found the exit on that floor and got out of there. I ran down to the front where we came in and started yelling frantically for them to shut it down and call the cops. They didn't seem too alarmed by my remarks, however. People went in and came out terrified all the time. This was nothing new to them. But when they saw the cut on my back, they began to take me more seriously. They called the cops. The entire place was blocked off, so no one could get out or in. They searched for hours through every room in that place and lined up all the male employees and people who were in the haunted house at the time for me to look, though. But he wasn't there. And neither were the two friends who had been with me in the fish tank room. They weren't able to find a chainsaw either. The only evidence other than the cut on my back was my blood dripped throughout the second floor, as well as the blood of my two friends in the fish tank room. They say that the amount of blood my friends lost wouldn't have been enough to be fatal to either of them, though. This was 6 months ago, and they still have no red leads on the location of my two missing friends or who the man with the chainsaw was. They claim the investigation is ongoing, but I feel quite strongly as though they've forgotten and moved on. The reason I'm sharing my story now is because today I saw an article online about the grand reopening this September of the ____ haunted house with all new horrors. But little does anyone know the biggest horror of a haunted house is not knowing who's really inside. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.